Hey, what's up, everybody? Hello to you, Jeremy Lord. How are you, mate?
Good, thanks, man. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for getting up early with us. Hello, chat. I hope you guys are still sticking around from the Paul Tranny stream about streaming, getting super inception there. So good. Hey, Sam, Connor, Paul. It's awesome if you're sticking around. That's awesome. Juan, Aria, it's all good. It's been an amazing day on Adobe Live in the US. We're just starting here in Australia. It's 8:30 in the morning. You might hear some Australian native birds in the background of Jeremy or my microphone just to show some authenticity. Um, but yes, Jeremy Lord, thank you so much for joining us. This is the first time we're doing a remote call in this working from home mode. So
Yeah,
how are you doing? How are you coping?
all good, man. Actually, it's really super good to be here. It's great that we can still kind of do this, even from isolation. And otherwise, I think just like freelance life is not that much different from isolation, anyways. So,
Right.
not a huge readjustment for me, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Well, it's good to have you. Good to have you here. We've done a whole bunch of live streams together, and we've actually got two set up, which is cool because we're always torn between should we focus kind of in Photoshop or do some type stuff in Illustrator. And we thought, well, why don't we do a double whammy?
Yeah, that's right. So today, I'm just going to go through my sort of usual Photoshop process on a digital piece.
Hmm.
And then tomorrow we will jump into Illustrator. For those of you guys who have watched streams with me before, you know that that's not something I do willy nilly.
Yeah.
But it is an awesome tool, especially for doing custom type, which is what we'll be looking at tomorrow. So we'll
Hmm.
be doing a bit of custom type and then bringing them back into Photoshop, home turf, and mixing it up with that. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. That is awesome. So we'll give you a bit of a idea of what we're doing over here. So keep in mind these are Sydney, Australia times, but this is what we're doing this week here on Adobe Live. We've got something every day. So yesterday we had Ben Marriott, which was awesome, and today we have Jeremy Lord mucking around in Photoshop, drawing some stuff. Tomorrow we're going to do some custom type stuff in Illustrator and bring it back to Photoshop. Then on Friday we've got some Premiere Pro tips with Ian Haig. We've actually got something happening on Saturday as well, but that's not quite there yet. So we've got a lot of stuff kind of coming to you guys very, very soon. And I thought what we might do is just show some of your finished work first, Jeremy. So people that might not be familiar with your
Yeah.
work can check that stuff out. Hey, everyone in chat again. RB, Jan, super cool to have all you there. Hey, Joe, going to come and do some chat moderation for us. That's awesome. Great to see you. Some friendly faces in there. Festus is in the house.
Oh, Festus, my man.
Oh, man. Very good. Mornir, I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but how you doing? Recognize you from before the other day. It's great to see you as well. And John, oh yeah, so I'll give you a bit of a quick, just before Jeremy jumps into his work, actually, I'll give you a little bit of a quick kind of rundown of how we're going to do things. We are here for 2 hours, and feel free to ask questions in chat and anything you want, anything at all. And what we tend to do is hold some of the sort of bigger meaning of life questions until the middle. So I've actually got a little timer up here. We'll start that, and we're gonna get some stuff done. We're gonna learn some things first in this first kind of part, and then we're gonna ask all the meaning of life questions sort of in the middle. But feel free to ask questions as we go through. All right, I'll hand over to you now, Jeremy, before I start my little timer.
All right, so I should get ready for some meaning of life questions then. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I kind of preempted it, so now you're gonna definitely get some meaning of life questions.
No, that's good, man. I think the more questions, the better. I think really,
Mm,
it's part of my skill set is drawing and talking. So that's about as much as I can handle. So yeah, plenty of questions is the more the merrier.
cool.
So this is my work. So we're just looking at my website. If you go to my Behance as well, so it's pretty much the same stuff you'll see on there. My website is jeremylord.com. And what you'll see from this, and this all hold true today, is a lot of kind of Japanese, cyberpunk, mangas, all kind of different things happening, all of that kind of dressed with these very neon sorry, not manga, but sort of 80s colors that come into the mix. So we've got a lot of pinks, a lot of like light blues, things like this, for instance, where it's sort of just a bit of a mishmash of Japanese / 80s. Then other times I'll go full manga. So this is a job that I did for a Japanese pub in Surrey Hills in Sydney. And that was just sort of full manga. So I have all these kind of different like valves that I can turn and sort of go full cyberpunk or go full neon, go full 80s, go full manga. And it just keeps it a little bit more kind of fresh for me, a little bit more interesting than always kind of feeling like I'm doing the same thing and knowing what I'm going to do before I do it. But in saying that, there's obviously a fair bit of repetition. So today, surprise, surprise, I'm going to be drawing a neon lit geisha. And then tomorrow we'll get into some kind of cool 80s texts like this kind of vibe. So yeah, that's pretty much my whole body of work in a nutshell.
Nice one. Awesome. Yeah, I guess when I sort of say, hey, come on Adobe Live, you can do whatever you want, I shouldn't be surprised that you want to do some cyberpunk cool stuff.
That's right. Yeah, and wearing my cyberpunk t-shirt, representing.
Yeah. Well, I am wearing my Goros t-shirt as well.
I can see that.
Just to represent. All right, cool. Well, why don't we jump in? We'll do some Photoshop stuff. I'll get the timer started. Jump in there, guys, and ask questions as Jeremy does his thing.
Cool. All right. So we're going to try and sort of keep it relatively basic today. I'm a bit of a sucker for adding detail and just going on and on and on. It's one of the awesome things about working digitally, but it also can be one of the pitfalls of working digitally is this like, when is your piece finished kind of thing. So we'll try and not get there today because we've only got 2 hours and usually a piece takes me a lot longer than 2 hours. But yeah, so I'll start getting in there now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a basic sketch. So I've just got an A3 canvas here. You can see because I don't work in Illustrator, I have to consider these things before I start my pieces in terms of what's likely going to be the output of this. So in this case, I've got A3. If, by some miracle, I end up doing something that I might want to do as a print, I'll be stuck at that size with A3. I won't be able to do A2 because it'll lose resolution. So I have to consider these things. But for now, we'll just stick with A3 at 300 dpi, and I've just got a basic background, and I've just created a new layer for my sketch. And we're going to get into the right habit straight away, and I'm going to label this sketch. Labeling your layers is really important, but it's kind of the thing that nobody ever really wants to do. It's kind of like doing your taxes. Like you every year you go like, oh, I'm going to stay on top of it, I'm going to stay on top of it. And then at the end of the financial year, you're like, oh, I didn't stay on top of it. So let's just like start well. I'm not making any promises that I'll keep labeling them as I create them, but yeah, at least we're off to a good start. Right, so what I would do here is
be forgiving to you.
Yeah, I think it's a common thing. So don't feel too guilty if you guys don't name your layers as well. But yeah, definitely something to think about. All right, so I'm using a couple of custom brushes here. I haven't created these myself. I'm not really huge on using like crazy fancy brushes. Like, oh, I've got a brush for drawing mushrooms and I've got a brush for drawing hair and all that kind of stuff. I'm a little bit more of a sort of a traditional guy. It's probably my sort of classical training. But I do tend to use a pencil brush and an inking brush. Those are the two things that I will focus in on the most. And what I've done is I've gone to this guy's website who's Friendon. He does a lot of really cool brushes, and he does a pencil brush, which is pretty common, and a nice Inca brush, which I really like to use as well. It's got some really good settings on it. So these are the two brushes that I'll switch in between today. So let's get started. So I'll lay down a blue sketch line, and as you can see, that's got a little bit of texture. This brush has got some kind of like pencil-y looking texture to it. In our brush settings, it's also got a few different aspects to it. So I'm using a Cintiq here, a Wacom. So that gives me a little bit more pressure, a little bit more opacity when I'm pressing down, and it also thins out a little bit, tapers off as I release my pressure. So it gives me a really good natural feel. And it's blue because it's an old animators thing where you use blue pencil so that it doesn't show up as much, so that when you come on top of that with a black, you can see the black line drawing a little bit better. But as I said, like it used to be an animator thing where when you were shooting on a line tester, which was black and white, this blue wouldn't show up. So you could do your black on top of it, and that pencil sketch would go away, and you wouldn't even have to erase it. So it's just one of those things that's kind of carried over from traditional art into digital art. And for me, blue and pink are it's my jam. So I really enjoy doing it. So all right, what we're going to do today, again, I would probably start kind of sketching away and seeing kind of where I'm going. I've got a little bit of an idea of what I'm doing today and what I'm going to draw. But in order to save a little bit of time, what I'm actually going to do, because I'm going to do a full face-on thing, I'm actually going to use my symmetry tool, which is this guy up here, little butterfly kind of cut in half. And we're just going to go with a vertical symmetry. So that just smacks it right bang in the middle of my canvas. I can stretch that out to go to the full canvas. It doesn't really matter. If you just leave it like that, it's still going to do the symmetry on all the sides up here. So it's still kind of drawing across the entire thing. So it doesn't really matter if you don't kind of stretch it out all the way, but just for visual sake, I quite like to do that. So it comes pre-made, comes preloaded with the handles that you're normally seeing in Photoshop. So I'm just going to stick that on there. And that's going to allow me to do a little bit of symmetry here and go ahead and start sketching. So I'm going to get into this a little bit.
Cool. Do you often use references when you're drawing?
Yeah, so probably not as much as I should. It's one of those things. I don't know what it is. I think maybe I just like to make life harder for myself than it needs to be. But there's definitely this thing where I'll try and do it from memory first, and then after like 3 or 4 times doing it and it doesn't work, then I'll go like, all right, cool, Jeremy, just get reference.
Right.
I'm not sure why I do that. It's probably just like a self-destruction artistic kind of thing. But reference is absolutely 100% super important. Especially when I'm drawing hands, I'll always I'll take a photo of my own hand in the angle that I need it, or I'll get my my girlfriend to pose for me and take a photo of her hand or her arm or whatever, and I'll just use that as a reference. It just adds a lot more authenticity to your work, 100%. So I think while I'm saying I don't necessarily use it as much as I should, it's definitely, I think, an important thing. So yeah, reference is always really, really good. And every time I do it, I'm just like, oh man, that looks so much better than me trying to sort of guesstimate what that hand looks like at this awkward angle that I'm working with.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I've got
mic,
books upon books.
My mic was quite soft. It's because I've got some rosellas hanging out,
they're going crazy
above my head. So sorry, I'm going to try and get the balance right. Let me know if the Rosella to Flynn mic ratio is one way or the other, and I'll do my best to balance that out.
Yeah, they're going crazy behind you there, man.
They love it.
Have you got some bird feed out or something?
No, I just have a gutter sort of right above me here, and they all bathe in the morning.
Yep.
I've turned the music down a little bit too. Let us know, guys. I'm happy to make those changes.
All right. So again, I'm starting with a Geisha here. I'm probably not going to do reference because I've done this a bunch of times, and I'm kind of confident with what I'm doing. But I think it's definitely one of those things where you can kind of program things into your brain and your hand.
Yeah.
After drawing them a few times, you know what they're like, but that can also be really kind of treacherous because you think you know what it looks like, but actually you don't. And that can be the thing that makes you not look at reference and just go like, yeah, that looks right to me. where it's just an automatic kind of reflex for you to do something like that. And that's usually when artists kind of make mistakes, when they're sort of like, I know how to do this, and then you do it without actually looking at what it should actually look like.
Right.
And that's generally a pretty bad thing to do. Yeah. All right, so I'm trying not to zoom in and out. Usually when I'm doing this, I'd be doing this like a lot, but I don't want to make you guys all like crazy motion sickness. So I'm trying to limit the amount of times that I do that. But that would definitely be something that would happen quite often in my normal kind of process. All right, so she's kind of looking down, face on. I'm going to give her these rad, like 80s kind of pit vipers. For those of you guys who are familiar with the 80s, they're those kind of really cool, like wide windscreen kind of glass sunnies that you see.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead with that. And again, this is where, like, I've got obviously, like, she's a geisha, so Japanese, that's a tick. I'm getting a little bit of 80s with those kind of pit vipers. The 80s will come into the colors as well a little bit later on. And then I'm probably going to throw some cyberpunk in there as well, by making her a little bit kind of like mecha, a little bit kind of fusion. Like she might have little kind of attachments on her forehead, or a little bit of, cyberpunky vibes going on. So yeah, so that's all just kind of coming in varying measures. It's a little bit. I love to use cooking analogies when I'm teaching as well. So I teach at Billy Blue, which is a design school in Sydney. And yeah, all of my students will know that I do like a good food analogy. I think probably Flynn, you're familiar with that concept from me as well.
Yes, I am. Like a well-cooked pasta, I am very aware of your food analogies.
Yep.
Does that work? Does that pass?
That passes. Yeah, I'll take that.
Does that hold mustard?
It cuts it.
It cuts the mustard. What's your favorite design or illustration food analogy that you got for chat? You're gonna have to back that up with an example, I think.
I think the pizza analogy is always a good one. It's something we can kind of talk about if one of you guys asks a question about kind of style. Some of you guys ask that quite often, and I saw in Ben's stream yesterday, a lot of people were asking about sort of style and how do you find it. So we can kind of talk about that. So I might pull out my my pizza analogy. I'll save it for then if we get a question. So that's a brief for you guys.
Wow.
Ask me a style related question. So yeah, so again, this is just me taking my time, trying to make sure that I've got the right jawlines. Are really tricky. Like they make such a difference in terms of how that's going to come across. So here she's got a real kind of like quite a strong jawline. If I go really super sharp, it's maybe a little bit too kind of almond and basic shape. So really getting that jawline is something that I'll spend quite a bit of time on, and getting the exact curve that I kind of need / want. Because it's 80s, we might just kind of give her a little bit of a Grace Jones kind of look and go for a bit more of a kind of squared off jaw. Her chin's probably still a little bit too strong there. So again, this is just me, like, for the sort of foreseeable future, just making sure that I'm happy with that sketch before I go in and ink it all up. And I think that's a really important kind of thing to touch upon is don't jump the gun. I think it can be super tempting to jump the gun and go like, oh man, I'm really excited to start.
Oh. May have lost you for a second there, Jeremy. I'm sure you'll come back. I'm sure he'll be back. May have lost you there, buddy. Meanwhile, I appreciate the wow references in chat. WoW dwarf references. Let me just see if we can get him back. Seem to have lost Jeremy's internet connection, so he'll be back in a sec. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just fade that back in. Oh my golly gosh. That's right. I'm sure he'll be back in a second. Oh, the internet in Australia. You know what? It's probably the galahs out there. Whoops. Do I just have Jeremy's head sitting up there? Sorry about that. Oh dear. All right. Let me call Jeremy back here. We'll get him in. Talk amongst yourselves. We won't be long. Yeah, it was definitely the bird. All right, we'll just be a couple of minutes sorting this out, guys. So I'm just gonna fade out for a second, but we'll be back very soon. Hey guys, all right. I think we are good. Hey Jeremy.
Yo, sorry about that. Um, yeah, we're not known to have the best internet connection in this country, unfortunately.
It's all right.
So um, we'll have to send a thank you note to the PRs that be a little bit later on. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah. So um, yeah. In the meantime, I've gone and finished all my illustration. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm still kind of carrying on with this and seeing where we're going. Hopefully, you guys are still in the chat and able to hopefully ask some questions a little bit later on. So we were just going through um, this kind of preliminary sketch, and I was talking a little bit about the different kind of levels of each kind of aspect of my work that I can turn on and off when I'm kind of doing this. So in this one, I'm kind of obviously doing a little bit of Japanese. We're probably going to throw in some kind of cyberpunk references a little bit later on, and just sort of see if we can kind of mech her up a little bit more and try and see how that's going to look. We might do a little bit of that, we might not. It depends, but yeah. So it's just all these kind of little sliders that I can kind of turn on and off when I'm doing any piece. And we should probably give her some eyes as well, just to be on the safe side, just so she can experience the world in full. And we're going to give her nice kind of long, cool eyelashes and make sure that they kind of come back down. And then there we go. How's that looking? My favorite. And again, yeah, just the importance of making sure that you're happy with the sketch that you've laid out before you go in and actually do the inking is really, that's I think a super important thing to try and remember, is making sure that you've done everything correctly before you go away. It's one of those things that I have a tendency to kind of jump the gun a little bit, and try and just get into the illustration maybe before I should. And cooking analogy, it's a little bit like I'm really keen to make this, like, you know, pie or whatever, but the pastry is not quite ready. It hasn't rested enough, but I'm just going to jump in and start making the pie mix anyways. That's just going to play tricks on you later on. So it's always good to just be patient enough to get it right, and you'll thank yourself. Like, future you will say thank you to past you when you're doing this, just to make sure that yeah, everything's all good. So yeah, so that's her eyes looking pretty good. I'm gonna do for this one. I'm gonna do what's known as an honorable geisha, and that is a samurai geisha. So they had in the Edo periods certain women, certain geisha who were samurai as well. So that's who she's going to be. So I'm going to give her a little bit more kind of a warrior feel. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to get rid of these guys for the time being. And I'm going to give her some cool katanas just kind of as hair decorations. This is not very realistic. Like, why would you have two giant swords stuck in your hair? But it's just one of the benefits of being an illustrator, is you can draw
Swords in
whatever.
people's hair.
Yeah,
Why not?
exactly. And she's totally fine with it. So yeah, so that's just going to give her that kind of, like, again, it's all about the kind of ingredients that you throw in there. And when you're doing this, if you're trying to get that kind of flavor through of, like, oh, I get it, she's a warrior, then obviously you're going to have to stick in that flavor at some point. And so that's what I'm doing mine. There's a good little thing as well that you can do when you're kind of messing around with this. If, like, I'm not super happy with the angle of her hair here, sometimes it's a little bit tricky when you're doing the symmetry thing, sorry, but because it won't replicate on either side. But using liquify, so filter liquify, and using this one here, which is just the forward warp tool, and this can allow me to just rejig my line a little bit. It's almost like if I was working in Illustrator and seeing how that's going to look. Obviously, you can see it's not replicating that to the other side, but that doesn't really matter because I can just come back in later on and retrace that as I need. So there's definitely some good options for you guys to do this on, like we were talking about jawline, for instance. That can be a really handy thing to just fix things without having to necessarily redraw the entire thing, which might take a little bit too much time for you. But yeah, we're just rejigging that line a little bit using the liquify tool, and that's gonna just give us a little bit more. You can see how that's gonna look. So that's undoing and redoing. And to be honest, I'm not sure that I like it better, so I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Nice.
No harm done.
We've got a question about your brushes, actually, which might be pertinent to what we're doing. What are your go-to brushes?
So normally when I'm doing stuff, I usually just tend to use the round brush. Like those are just the two brushes that I would use. So this one here, which again is a Frendon brush. There's also Carl T. Webster, does a lot of really cool brushes in partnership with Adobe. But yeah, I use this pencil brush and I use a simple round brush. Theoretically, I can use the different sort of pre-loaded brushes. So this hard round brush, for instance, if we go into here, we can get some nice effects with this. So this is going to be a kind of a nice inker brush for us as well. We can kind of reduce the spacing. So I would happily use one of these with a little bit of extra smoothing. You guys will see this in a sec as well. I'm kind of using smoothing a lot to make sure that that line's nice and clean. So that's one of the brushes that I would use quite often. I've also created my own pencil brush, which are these ones, which again give us that kind of like fuzzy kind of textured edge. And those ones are literally like, if you're doing a quick hack to try and do one of these, that's one of these ones. So any of these guys here, I usually go with the last one. And what I've done is I've just put in a bunch of different settings on here to make it a little bit more like a pencil brush, if you will. So the nib itself looks a little bit like this, but it's just, yeah, like again, this guy puts a little bit more texture in his brushes. So I just use his, but for a pencil sketch, that's probably not going to make it into the final piece. Something like this is totally fine as well. But yeah, like I said, I don't tend to use millions of brushes in here. You can see I've got lots and lots of brushes loaded into here, different like cross hatching and all these kind of brushes, but they're not necessarily something that I spend too much time investing in, just simply because, like, if I don't know, maybe it's an old kind of, again, it's that old like classical training where it's, if you can't do it with a normal brush, then maybe a super crazy kind of a special brush is only going to make matters worse for you.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit like you've got the most kind of sophisticated oven, but you've never cooked a day in your life. And well, that's not really going to help you. So yeah, there's definitely times where a fancy brush will save you some time. But I don't know, I'm a believer as well in this idea that it's just like, I like to draw the thing myself as well, and see if I can kind of get there basically on my own kind of steam, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I would say like, yes, this is the correct way of doing it, and anybody who uses a downloaded brush for stuff is cheating. Because I've heard comments before on the fact that the symmetry tool is a bit cheating, which I get, but I also think like, well, if the tools are there, like why not use them? Like I'm sure that like a prehistoric carpenter would have looked at a hammer and gone like, oh, that's cheating. I do all my stuff with a rock. Well,
I just hammer in nails
yeah,
with
but
my head. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's what progress is for. That's why we
Right.
have all this tech.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you should definitely use it. And if anybody kind of says like, oh, well, that's a little bit cheating, well, then, oh well, cool, yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'll jump around a little bit when I'm kind of doing all these illustrations, um, but yeah, so that's kind of the gist of this. And there, depending on how much kind of detail I will do, I'll spend kind of varying amounts of time at this stage trying to get all this right. And I do like to add detail, so these kind of things can get away from me very, very quickly.
Yeah. How
Where
long would you aim? Like, obviously we're on a live stream, but how long would you normally want to spend at this stage?
again, it really just depends on like what the application of this is for. So if this was a client brief, then obviously I'm gonna try and not spend more money,
More money.
more time. Time is money in those cases. So um, if I'm spending too much time on this, like that's all good, but I also need to balance the fact that it's like, well, I'm only actually being paid for 10 hours and I'm spending 20 on this. That's not necessarily a great position to be in. There are obviously times where I don't really care about that because I'm working on a brief that I really enjoy, and my main priority isn't necessarily to make as much money in the most efficient way possible. It's more to just really like put out a really awesome piece that I'm happy and proud of.
Yeah.
And that's a really, obviously that's a good position to be in when you're doing these kind of things. But when it's a personal piece, just like something that I'm doing for myself, just for fun, there's no real. It's kind of just like how long is a piece of string kind of thing. Um, there's no real indicator, but I would say this, that like over the years, I am trying to train myself to not be such like, I want to say perfectionist, but that sounds a little bit jerky, a bit kind of like I'm a perfectionist. I kind of don't like that word simply because it sounds a little bit kind of up yourself, but a little bit less just indecisive, I guess. Indecision and something where it's like, should I give her these kind of glasses, or should I give her, like sometimes I'll come in with a different color and try something else out. So like, oh, what if she had cool like heart-shaped glasses? That'd be kind of like cool, Bootsy Collinsy kind of. That's kind of an interesting thing. So then, like, I could spend a long time playing dress up with these characters that I create, and like, oh, what if instead of the star, it's like a little bit of a Super Mario reference where it's a mushroom instead, like a one-up kind of thing. So there is a lot of that going on quite often in my work.
And do you
Even
ever
now
do
that I've done,
variations of the same thing? So you just
oh,
really
dude, like,
yeah.
yeah, 100%. That's definitely something, which is again one of the really awesome things about digital, is it allows you to do that. But it can also be really tricky because the more variations you're doing, the less time you're actually spending on doing the actual work.
Yeah.
So it can, like, you definitely need to balance that. And I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to do this thing where I'm a little bit more conscious of that when it happens, where I'm just like, okay, you're spending too much time on little decisions that shouldn't necessarily make or break your artwork. Like if your piece lives or dies on like whether or not she has these glasses or not,
Right.
that's not necessarily a great position to be in. So it's just something that I'm kind of trying to figure out a little bit more in my work, and trying to be not necessarily more efficient, because that's not a great word when we're talking about stuff like this, but just a little bit less indecisive
Right.
and
Yeah.
have maybe a little bit more of a plan when I'm going ahead. So what I'm doing today is something that I've kind of pre-prepared this in my brain,
Mm.
of what I was going to do, and I've prepared some colors as well, which we'll get to in a little bit. Mostly because we've only got 2 hours, so I don't want to be like sitting here for like today and tomorrow, and all you guys see is this kind of stuff. So I've pre-planned this, but often when I start a piece, it's just like I I just I feel like I want to make a food, but I haven't decided on a recipe yet, and so I'm playing around with all these kind of different things, and actually not really making much food
Yeah.
very much. So
Mm.
yeah, definitely having a plan is beneficial. Having a roadmap of where you're going
Mm.
is going to help you quite significantly. More hair decorations.
Yeah, Jan was asking, is that a Mario star?
It is, yeah. So again, like all the little different references that I will throw in to all of these, you'll see like some of my pieces. If I flip back to my website, you'll see a few different things coming in here. Like, let's see, this one, for instance, has got a lot of different little kind of references to fashion, video games. I've got a little Atari sticker there. I don't know if you guys can see that. Um, I'll put in some Star Wars things. So it's just one of the things that I really like doing with, and one of the things that I think lends itself well to when you're doing like a geisha like this, like something like this, for instance. There's a lot of stuff like a little X-Men logo, a little Mario star, a little smiley face, a little
Yeah.
Akira reference, like just lots and lots of little things, because geisha hair decorations are so like lavish and over the top. It's a perfect excuse for me to like get my detail fix on and get my kind of like pop culture video game reference on. And I think it's what I enjoy is also like when somebody looks at a piece that I've created and kind of starts to find all the little Easter eggs that I've dropped in there.
Mm.
um, so yeah, so that is a little bit of a Mario star. It's not the most sort of super well hidden Easter egg, but yeah, it's still something that I really enjoy doing and working with, is this idea of just kind of popping a lot of different references here and there.
Super cool. And just to let you know, chat, we've got about 5 minutes, then we're going to get started. We're going to take a short break as we sort of focus on a couple of questions before we kind of move on to phase two. Although I don't know if our small cutoff has affected your timeline, Jeremy. If it has, that's totally cool. If you want to
No,
keep going for a little bit longer, or
I can grab some questions. I could probably do questions and sketch a little bit. Um, I'm happy to do either, really. That interruption hasn't necessarily cramped my style too much,
okay,
thankfully. So
you're a
yeah,
pro, is what you're saying.
we'll see.
You're,
We'll
you're a
see.
perfectionist, is what you're saying. Is that it? No.
No, Jamie,
No, I
no.
hate that. All right, I'm gonna ask.
Um,
I'm gonna ask you Festus's question then. We'll kind of
all right,
merge our Q and A
shoot.
section with this. Um, it's asked a couple of times in your streams, and we haven't got around to it somehow. But your tale of success getting to work with Xbox early in your career.
Mm,
Can you tell that story?
I can tell that story.
Yeah.
So it's very much one of those things. I'm sure you guys have all heard that thing of it's not what you know, it's who you know. What the only caveat that I would add to that is who you know helps you out and puts you in the right position, but then what you know is what makes that connection work for you. So in this instance, I um, through working with you, actually, Flynn, we were at Tractor Design School at the time, which
Mm.
sadly is no longer a thing.
Yeah, Google it.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist.
But we were, yeah, so we were teaching together at the school, and there was a good connection to Adobe through the school. And so I started actually working with Adobe through that. And then a bit of a kind of a long tail, but it's I think it's one of those things where it's like, yes, luck was involved, but it's also this thing where like you got to follow up on that as well.
Mm.
And it's like it's one of those tales of like people hear that it's like, oh well, you just got lucky, and it's like yes, but there was also some of my doing involved. So I
Right.
was fortunate enough to have this connection with Adobe through working with you guys at Tractor.
Mm.
Um, and then Adobe and Microsoft also have a partnership going where they do a lot of their kind of products, kind of trying to link up with what Microsoft machines are doing. It's kind of like that ideal collaboration in between the devs on a particular kind of console and then the people who actually make the video games. Trying to see like, all right, well, what features would you guys like? What do we need? How do gamers like to do their thing? And so that's basically what's happened in this instance. So we were invited to a kind of closed door launch of the new Surface Studio, which at the time was new. I think that was like 6 years ago now.
Oh,
it was a while ago.
You're making me feel old. I was there.
Yeah.
You were so
yes,
young.
you were there too.
You were so young.
And so naive.
So naive.
Days when we could shake hands and high five.
Oh yeah, going outside. I remember that. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
You remember that chat.
And so, yeah, so basically they were showcasing that, and I started doing some illustration on there, and somebody spotted that and said, why don't we give you one to try out, and you can kind of test it out and let us know what you think. And so obviously I jumped on that occasion to try one, and I've still got the Surface Studio, which I use quite frequently, and it's actually really awesome. And so that started then a collaboration with them where I thought, all right, look, they've gave me this machine. I now have a contact at Microsoft that I can speak to a little bit more kind of directly rather than just sort of trying to randomly email somebody at Microsoft because it's such a huge company.
Right.
Like, how do you even approach that? So I was fortunate enough now to have that kind of that link to the right people, I guess. And so I thought, all right, well, while I'm testing this machine, why don't I do this piece? Why don't I do a piece that they might actually be able to use? And I'm a big gamer fan, so I decided I was going to do this thing around Xbox, and I created this illustration. But I gave myself a brief that I thought that they might actually use. So I think this is the clincher, right? This is the deal maker is don't just do something that you feel like doing, even though that's more or less what I've done here. It's the difference is try and think of a thing that they might actually brief you on if they came to give you a brief. So in this instance, these are all the exclusive games that Microsoft have. So Halo, Gears of War, Forza, Sunset Overdrive, all these different titles that they have, and using their little logo to create this kind of cool illustration around it. So I felt that this might be something that they could go like, okay, yeah, we might actually use this.
So it's kind of like a reverse brief to yourself.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's trying to figure out, like, know your client, know who you're trying to work with, and don't just do something that's necessarily super random and just goes like, oh, okay, well, that's because what might happen when you do something like this is they will just go, that's cool. We like art, just like the next person, but we don't see how we could use this.
Right.
So the real sort of difference here is try and show them something that you think they might go like, hey, yeah, actually, we could totally use this, and this would fall within the confines of our brand. It falls within our campaign. So at the time, the Xbox One X was just about to be launched. So I did something around that. I started doing a bunch of posters, and again, it's about showing them, here's what I think you guys should do with this, and it kind of like hint. And then I went in and did an actual Xbox box, right? So this would be amazing for me to be able to like have the artwork that I did be the artwork that's on the box that the console ships in, that'd be amazing. They might not have that idea, so I'm giving them that idea and I'm showing them like, okay, cool, look, this is how my artwork looks on this, hint, hint, use it this way, and trying to show them how, like, this is how you could use this particular brief. They ended up not using it like this. My contact at Microsoft really loved it and was kind of pushing for that, but headquarters said, no, not really. We've already got our kind of branding and campaigns set up, which is totally fair enough. And I think something that you need to potentially brace yourself to happen when you're doing this kind of thing is that you're going to show them and they'll be like, that's really nice, but no thanks.
Yeah, it can often happen with, like, obviously there's larger companies as well where there's certain things that are just sort of will come from, corporate and then kind of be, pushed out, and then there's other things that might be localized, like they might be localizing a particular game or, bus advertising or, sort of environment advertising or, something like that. But yeah, you don't know, you don't have access to that information yet, so you got to put yourself out there a little bit.
Exactly. So there is, and they also, like I said, they might just go, well, like we're a fan of what you've done, but we either don't have the budget or the campaign to use it, so we're not going to use it. And it's not necessarily any comment on your work.
Yeah, it's
just more of a like, not going to happen.
Yeah,
and that's fine. And you haven't lost anything if that's the case. But so what I'm doing now is I'm adding a cool kind of little neon triangle that's going to give it that kind of 80s thing. It's also going to be an excuse for me to use as a light source a little bit later on.
Cool.
So every now I'll do this where I will just start sort of making these different little elements that are going to come in and help me out later on. So I'm just going to pop that in here now, and I'm then going to rasterize this because it's a live shape. And then I think we are more or less ready to go.
Okay.
So at this stage, actually, I'm probably going to add in a couple of things, but I don't want the symmetry anymore, so I'm just going to turn that off. So go into my symmetry tool and just turn symmetry off. If I want it back on again, I can just say last symmetry used, so I don't have to realign it perfectly. But at this stage, I don't want it to be on anymore because I want to do things that aren't necessarily going to be applied to both sides. So I'll give her a little band-aid on the side. Again, she's a warrior, she's a bit battle worn, so she should have a band-aid there. Might also include a little bit of kind of face paint. Cool. Why not? And give her a little star tattoo here. I might also then start a new layer. And again, you can see now that I've said what I was going to do. I've fulfilled my own prophecy. I have not named these as I was creating these. So
nice one. Well, as you're doing that, we might we promised we would answer some questions. So we've got a handful of questions for you. So let's get stuck into a few of them. What do you say?
Cool. Yeah. I am just going to save this real quick. That's always an important step. But yeah, let's get stuck into some questions.
Cool. Tyson was asking just a little bit ago in chat, where would you suggest to start if you don't have a drawing or illustration background? Because you were classically trained, so you've kind of come at it from like that was like in a fancy French school.
Fancy French school where they talk like this.
Was that what it was called? Fancy French school?
Yeah, it's official name. No, so the school was called ESSAG in Paris, and it's one of those old school schools where they pride themselves in the fact that like Matisse went there and Leger went there and all these kind of different artist names studied there. So they're quite sort of fancy in that sense, and they are French, so it is a fancy French school. But they also do this thing where it's a 6 years. So I've actually got a master's, and not in illustration, but in graphic design. And they try and get you to do things. So the first year, for instance, you're asked to do a whole bunch of graphic design tasks, but you're not allowed to use a computer.
Right.
You have to do it all hand painted. All your posters, all your typography has to be hand painted, hand drawn, and so they really kind of hammer that into you, which is, I think, probably a good thing. But that's kind of the background that I started with. And so they did life drawing as well. So if you're not familiar with what life drawing is, it's basically model comes in, stripped down, and then you draw them in different poses. Life drawing, I think, is probably the most important exercise that you can do as an artist if you're trying to learn how to draw properly. It teaches you proportion, it teaches you scale, it teaches you shading. It also teaches you this thing, which I was talking about before, where you might have this tendency of doing like, oh, well, I know what a head looks like. A head is basically just this, and then you do that, and then this, and then you put an ear here, and like that's what a head looks like. It's like you've done this as an automatic kind of reaction.
Right.
What you need to do is you need to draw the model, not draw what's in your head, what you think you know. You need to look at stuff. So it really teaches you to look at things and pay attention to them, which is why we were talking about this before. Like using reference is really crucial, because if you don't have reference, you got nothing to look at. And so you got nothing to gauge whether or not you're doing the right thing. And for me, it's often that kind of difference in between seeing and looking. And that is a little bit like the difference in between hearing and listening. Like you can hear somebody talk, but you're not necessarily listening to what they're saying. Just like you can look at something, but you not necessarily see it. And one of the tests that I always like to do, at least for like some of my students who live in Sydney, is we've got the Opera House over here. It's an iconic building. Everybody knows what it looks like. You could see it in a photograph. You wouldn't know instantly what it is. But it's crazy how few people know how many sails are actually on the Opera House.
Right.
And like I always just go like, all right, so you've seen the Opera House before, you live in Sydney, so how many sails are on the Opera House? And almost nobody gets it right.
What's the answer? I would guess 6 from memory.
Yeah, see, that's what most people guess.
It's 9. Guess? Is it 9?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because you always forget about the little extra add-on the other side that you don't see necessarily all the photos and such. But if you were to sit there and actually draw the Opera House, you would remember that, because it forces you to actually do more than just look at it, but also see it. So there is definitely this thing that comes into play with all these ideas. And it's something that I have been kind of like, it's been hammered into me quite a bit. So
yeah,
that's really, really important for you guys. And I think life drawing does that. And it's definitely something that you want to think about doing if you're keen to get your drawing skills really up to scratch. I cannot stress enough the value of doing a life drawing class. And it can be really frustrating at first. Like anything that you start that you feel you're not very good at, you get frustrated, because it's like you see all these people doing it, and like Instagram is kind of like your worst enemy with that, because you can follow all these incredibly talented people and the way they draw is just not realistic. Like they're just different, and trying to sort of push yourself to be able to do that, whilst I think that can be really good, because it gives you a really, like shoot for the stars kind of thing. If that all that does is leads to your being frustrated because you can't draw like they do, I think that's going to be a problem, definitely. And one of the things that a lot of my students will say every now and then is, they'll, after like 3 months of doing drawing, I'll come in and kind of help them out, and they'll go like, why can't I do what you're doing? I'm like, well, I bloody hope you can't do what I'm doing, because you've only been doing it for 3 months and I've been doing it for 15 years. So like, that's just not like, it's like, oh, why can't I run faster than Usain Bolt? Like, you've only been training for a week. I'm not saying that I'm the Usain Bolt.
You're the Usain Bolt of basically the French Usain Bolt. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad we weren't recording when I got the amount of sales in the Opera House wrong, because that would have been really embarrassing. Someone would have taken my Australian license away. Back to the Easter egg thing. So the stars and some of the Easter eggs and anything. Johanna was asking, what's the most obscure Easter egg you've hidden? And I'll back that question up with another question, which is, have you ever hidden anything in your work that, like, any client work? Nothing risque, I'm sure, but like a little Mario star in the corner or something.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time. Like I will definitely hide, but like nothing like super offensive. I'm not like trying to
No.
be, like let me hide a reference in here that the client's not going to like. Or
No.
like if I'm doing
I'm sure
like,
you wouldn't do that.
for instance, like if I did something for Xbox, I wouldn't be like, let me hide a PlayStation logo in there. Like that's obviously not going to happen.
Wow.
Um,
That would be bad.
that would be really bad, and also just like not super productive for that. But I'm also, I've got a background as a skateboarder as well, and so every now and then I'll put in kind of references to different skateboarding brands, which again, like if you know that area, if you're a manga fan or a skateboard fan or a fan of the 80s or whatever, you'll know there's nothing crazy obscure. If you're kind of in that world a little bit, if you know a little bit about it, you'll know straight away what's happening. So there's nothing really like crazy obscure, because obviously the point of a reference is that somebody needs to be able to identify it. So if it's too much of an inside joke, then the whole point is lost on most people. So then that's not great. But yeah, I've anything from like super popular stuff like Star Wars. I've done, I think I did one a little while ago where I put the little Rebel Alliance logo in there.
All right. Just whatever game you're playing at the time, is that?
Yeah, yeah, or that, or just kind of whatever I'm feeling. So again, like with, where are we? Let's see if I can find something for you here. Just looking at this one. So this one has just a little bit of kind of like, that's the Japan Airlines logo just sitting in there. Because again, like Japan Air is a trick, a skateboard trick. If you know, those kind of things.
From my Tony Hawk Pro Skater days.
Yeah. So again, that's just a little thing. And again, like Japan Airlines took that from a famous, a well-known kind of Japanese icon.
Right.
So that reference has gone in there. Another one that I can show you guys, if we go to, this is the one that I was showing you guys before. She's got a whole bunch of different strings of things in here. So again, this one's probably the most kind of reference heavy one that I've done, because that's the whole point of it. And mixing these kind of themes of old and new in there, trying to get that kind of idea across. And this is definitely one of those ones that maybe has gone a little bit too far. So I've got a bunch of logos in here. Those are all just like actual logos, obviously. A bit of a Louis Vuitton pattern on there. But in here, see if you guys can spot all the different references that are in here. There's some hip hop, there's some movies, there's some skating, there's some manga. There's a whole bunch of different little references in here that you probably wouldn't notice too much if you were just looking at it. But it's one of the things that I really enjoy doing is like letting people kind of discover all the little bits and pieces in here that are there to be discovered. I think it just kind of like tells a little bit of a story. For that. So yeah, just whatever I'm kind of feeling and whatever works is probably what will happen. And I think generally, if you're working with the right clients will be happy to kind of have those things go in there as well, if you're putting them in there. All right, nice. So this is where my type's going to go. So I'm just kind of placing that quickly now. And I'm probably ready at this stage to start doing some inking.
Okay, cool. We've got a couple more questions
ahead of me. Doing some banging, so I hope that's not necessarily picking up too much. But
I think it's coming through a little bit, but I think that's all good. Right. We can still hear you, so it's all good. Got a couple more questions, so why don't we take some questions and then when we get on to like kind of phase 2, Let's change over to here. So let's have a little chat. So, what resources do you recommend for a beginner to start drawing? It's sort of similar to the other one, but I guess going out to a figure drawing at the moment is not possible in our current climate.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm sure there's some online stuff. There's so much online content going on.
There is, yeah.
But
There's various websites. There's like pose makers. There's a bunch of books that you can buy that just have a bunch of poses in there. Obviously, those come with a warning that you will be drawing naked people.
right.
So if that's not necessarily something that you're comfortable with, then don't do that.
Right.
But there's a lot of poses, pose books and things that you can kind of look at. References online that you can see. Otherwise, something that you can also do is there's I'm a strong advocate of this idea that you actually learn quite a bit from copying.
Right.
Copying is a little bit of a taboo thing, and I do literally mean tracing, at least at first. And then just like side by side copying when you're a little bit more comfortable with your kind of movements in your hand and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously creating your own thing. So the taboo around copying obviously is it's plagiarism. So don't do that.
Right.
Definitely don't copy a piece and then present it as something like, look what I made. That's just not down. But you can learn a lot. You can kind of program things into your brain, into your hand a little bit by copying things. If you're not kind of comfortable doing a lot of things. So I learned how to draw, for instance, by copying a lot of Dragon Ball characters. And so when I started drawing, I was doing a lot of, a lot of spiky hair, a lot of muscly dudes, very kind of rigid, straight kind of eyes. Because I was copying Dragon Balls.
Yeah.
And that obviously they're not my own drawings, but it taught me a lot about how to do hands, how to do basic anatomy. Not that Dragon Ball is kind of like the be all end all reference of anatomy. I'm sure a lot of doctors and that kind of stuff would look at it and be like, that's completely out of proportion. It is, because it's a manga and it's meant to be.
Yeah.
It's meant to be stylized, but it definitely does help to copy stuff. So any images that you find online, any illustrators that you really like, copy their work. And at first, if you're really not super comfortable with your drawing skills, I'd definitely say literally trace it, because it will program those things into your brain. You'll remember things, something that you draw again and again and again a lot of times becomes programmed in your head, and your hand is able to replicate those things quite a bit, which is why a lot of artists tend to draw similar things. A, because that's what they like drawing, but B, that's also because it's kind of their go-to. It's like your friend in high school who like learned the trick to draw Daffy Duck or whatever, and that's like every time they would just draw that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's that same kind of process. So definitely that. Books, reference books are always a really good thing. I've got a bunch of reference books for different poses, different action poses, for various kind of manga things. I've got a whole section on Pinterest as well, where I just grab a whole bunch of different tutorials, like how to draw heads, how to draw eyes, how to draw hands, which is, I think, really, really important, because you never stop learning. And I think it'd be arrogant on my end to just be like, well, I know how to draw these things now. It's like, yeah, you do, but you can always learn some more things and try different things. And I think definitely drawing is not like riding a bike. You don't just learn how to do it once in your life and then you know how to do it forever. If you stop drawing, your skills start going downhill again and you forget how to do it. So it's exactly like learning a language. You have to keep practicing that language and keep speaking it if you want to even just maintain the current level. If you want to learn more, then you got to do more and more and more. And I think, life drawing is a really good place to start, but it's not super accessible. So there's a bunch of online things that you can kind of do for that, for sure.
Nice one. I really like that. The next question was around Photoshop versus Illustrator. So in the case of when you were doing what you were doing before, like why not use Illustrator instead of Photoshop was the question. So I think we can kind of generally answer that.
Yeah. So at this stage, obviously I'm doing sketches. Illustrator is not a drawing program. You can draw, you can paint. There is a paintbrush, but for doing things like this where you're sketching,
Mm-hmm.
Illustrator is that's not Illustrator's domain. Absolutely not. You won't get the same textures. You won't get the same flexibility of stroke. You won't get the same opacity in terms of pressure or thickness. So absolutely do not recommend Illustrator at all when you're doing the sketch phase. In the next step of what I'm going to be doing, where I'm going to be inking, um, I actually probably should be doing this in Illustrator when I'll be inking it because it's probably a bit of a better program. And like I said at the very beginning of the stream, I have to be conscious of the size that I'm doing these pieces at because they're not vector. So whatever size I create them at is the maximum size that they'll be at. So I have to kind of play around with that and manage that. Whereas if I'm doing vector, you can work at any size and print like on a postage stamp or on the side of a 9-story building if you want to.
Yeah.
There's not going to be any less of resolution. So that's advantageous for sure. But it's for me, it's more just Illustrator's really, really awesome for different things. But what I do specifically is not necessarily I'm not super comfortable with Illustrator. It just does a couple of weird things for me that I don't necessarily like. The other thing I think which is important, which we've spoken about this actually before a lot on the live streams that we've done, is there's efficiency and then there's enjoyment.
Right.
And the difference here is, for me, I always use this analogy, which is not a food analogy, strangely enough, but if you don't know how to go somewhere, you can go into Google Maps and it'll show you how to get there. And what it does by default is it just assumes that you want to get there in the fastest way possible. So it gives you it'll give you different routes, and some routes will be like a minute slower or 2 minutes slower. So it gives you by default, like, this is the fastest way to get to where you're going. But where Illustrator for me is probably going to be faster, what I might want to do is actually, there's a park on the way to where I'm going. I like walking through that park, or I like walking down this street because it's all the jacarandas in bloom in November or whatever, and it's more enjoyable, and yet adds like 5-10 minutes to my trip. But it's more fun for me to go that way rather than like walking alongside the highway breathing in all the fumes. And so for me, that's the kind of the difference there is like, yes, Illustrator would probably make more sense and it'd be smarter for me to use. It'd be more efficient. But for me, the process of drawing in Photoshop is more akin to actual drawing.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that a lot more.
Yeah.
Whereas using pen tool and using all those kind of things, like for what I was doing down here in the jawline, for instance, when I was spending a little bit of time doing that, Illustrator is amazing because you could just do it and then fix the anchor points and it fixes the curves for you and you don't have to redraw the whole thing. That is glorious. But it's not really, for me, again, personally, it doesn't feel like drawing as much as me actually drawing it in Photoshop.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that balance. Now, I have, we'll probably do a live stream on this at some point when I'm a little bit more comfortable with it, but Fresco is really kind of cool with that because it is vector, there's the vector brush in there. And I'm starting to do more and more of my inking in Fresco, which then translates into vector, and that feels a lot more like drawing. So there is a good crossover there for me, but today we're just going to focus in on this. Tomorrow we're going to jump into Illustrator to do slightly different things.
Yeah, cool. Cool. All right. Very, very good. Well, let's move on to phase 2. So we have about, say we got about 40 minutes left, maybe 35.
Okay.
Give you a timer.
Right, so,
thanks for the questions, by the way, chat. They're great. Keep them coming because Jeremy's pretty good at answering questions as he goes as well. So
yeah, and as you guys have probably noticed, I love to talk.
It's super weird if the guest doesn't talk for 2 hours, so I do appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm still, this is the thing, I'm still like feeling the heart sunnies. Like, I might just throw it over to the chat. What do you guys reckon? Do you guys think?
Good question.
heart-shaped sunnies or the super rad kind of pit viper visor thing.
We'll put it out to chat.
And
Let
we'll
us
come
know.
back to that. So yeah, so I'll just work with that. But so what I'll do now is basically I've got all my sketches. So just to be nice and clean, I'm just going to grab all of those and then Command G, and that's going to group them. So they're all just sitting there now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to drop the opacity on all of these. I might just hide that for now, but just that whole thing now will get a lowered opacity.
I got to tell you something because it's just hilarious every time I read it. Jan was saying Jeremy Lord reminds me of a younger version of Russell Crowe.
Really?
I like it.
I've never gotten that one
I
before.
thought you needed that information. I like it a lot.
Why? Because on looks or on attitude?
I don't know, dude. It's
I'm curious about that.
That's chat. That's the vibe you're giving out this morning. So I
Okay.
haven't seen you throw a telephone or anything like that. So
Well, never say never.
we're not done yet. It's live.
Still got 30 minutes to go.
Yeah, that's right. It looks like Pit Viper is the way to go. A lot of votes
cool.
for Pit
Well,
Viper.
We'll go with Pit Vipers then. So I've just grouped all my sketches. If I'm being a good boy, I will label that group and call it sketches. And now I will go and make a new layer and call this one. I usually use the shorthand OTL for outlines. That's just my thing, just because I'm too lazy to write out outlines, so I just use OTL. Mm-hmm. So I'll do that. I'll go back into my symmetry tool and just go last use symmetry. So that's where it becomes really awesome, because I know that this is like perfectly aligned with what I did before. And we are going to jump to a different brush now, and I'm going to use this Inca brush, which has this kind of tapered edge stroke. It doesn't have any opacity value, which is good. I don't want opacity. I want a nice, clean, solid black inking line. And so that we're not getting too much of a jitter, I'm going to go and add in like roughly anywhere in between 30 to sometimes even like 50% smoothing. And what you'll notice is it'll slow my line down a little bit. Like my line has a bit of a harder time catching up, but it'll just be way smoother with what I'm trying to do.
I often struggle with the balance between over smoothing and underdoing it. I find it quite different. Like almost on a different day, it almost changes.
Yeah, and I think the tricky thing with smoothing as well is what it does behind the program, not to get too kind of techie or geeky about it, is it actually pretends like there's, like if this is your brush nib and this is the your actual where the pen is hitting the page, it'll pretend like there's a little string attached to those. And some of the programs that you can use third-party programs, will actually show you an animated string.
Right.
And as you move your pen that way, that string gets tighter until eventually it's tight enough to start moving this guy as well.
Oh, okay.
And so where it gets a little bit kind of funny is if I'm drawing a line from here to there, obviously there won't be any delay. But if I move my actual brush shape up to there, I've actually stopped there, but it's stopped the line here. So because the string is kind of acting there, so I actually need to go further. So it can be a little bit kind of funny to use at first, but I like it because it just gives me those smooth lines, which again, I would probably get if I would just be able to work in Illustrator, but I quite like doing this process in Photoshop and trying to get those smooth lines. And it will mean that I will have to do these kind of cutting in to get these nice kind of clean lines. So cutting in is basically or cutting back is trying to get a nice kind of clean, super nice tapered edge on a lot of my line work. So it's a little bit of extra work, but again, it's worth it for me trying to get that nice kind of feeling and enjoying myself when I'm actually working on the thing as well, which is really important. Like you're going to be spending a lot of time doing this as an illustrator. Yeah. So you want to be able to enjoy yourself for sure.
Big chunk of your life, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. Little tip for you guys on these ones. So again, it's interesting actually. Ben was talking about this yesterday with his animation and kind of the smoothness of the animation. If it's too smooth, it becomes a little bit not real anymore. So you want to keep that kind of drawing vibe.
Right.
Um, and the difference here is when I'm doing straight things, I could just do it by hand and it keeps that kind of warm, natural feeling. But if I am trying to go for a really actual straight thing, then I'll just use my mouse and click shift and hold down, and that's going to draw a perfectly straight line
Right.
in between those two. So if I'm doing things that are really, really close together where I have to like exercise crazy line control to do that, I might just kind of skip to doing that. But in this instance, I'm just going to do it by hand, and it's going to keep that kind of warm feeling. You'll see me doing this a lot where I'll do a line. It's like, nope, that's not the right one. That hasn't worked. So do it again. And again, I'm having a hard time with this one. There we go. I just used shift. I cheated.
Nice.
So again, this is where Illustrator would make more sense because I could just do my line and fix it later. I wouldn't have to kind of redraw it.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Have another question if you can answer it as you go.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to find your specific drawing style?
So that's. I'm glad someone has asked that, and that was a brief for you guys as well. Ask me a style related question. You guys spoke about this yesterday with Ben in his live stream, and style is a strange one. I'm undoing these because I've realized I'm using a too thick a brush. Right. That question, I think, in itself can be a little bit misleading. Where, how long did it take you to develop your style? Or a common question is also, how do you find your style? An artist's style, and not to get too like metaphysical or deep about it, but an artist's style is their personality.
Right.
And basically asking how long it took for you or how did you find your style is a little bit like asking somebody how did you find your personality.
Right. Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily something that you can look for, and something that Ben was talking about as well yesterday in his stream was like you don't really find a style. You can't necessarily go like, oh, my style is going to be this. I'm going to do manga style, or I'm going to do 80s style, or I'm going to do cyberpunk style. If that's something that you enjoy doing, then yeah, you can make that conscious decision to be like, I'm going to try and really kind of cyberpunky things. But that's more down to like who you are. That has less to do with like, oh, I think I should be this person. And again, it's that analogy kind of holds up where it's you wouldn't necessarily do that as a person of like, oh, I want to be Kanye West. That's who I want to be. And then you become that person. I think that might be a little bit contrived. So the clincher here is if you look for a style, you're just going to find someone else's, because you'll find one that already exists. And it might be more or less aligned with what you're trying to do, but you're always going to have to come in and give it your own kind of feeling, if you will. So I'm far from the only person who uses Japanese themes in their work. I'm also far from the only manga artist. I'm also not the only person who does cyberpunk in their work. And there are lots of people whose work is relatively similar to mine. And a lot of people would say we have the same style, but there are kind of differences in there from one to the other, which are important to remember. So I think when you're trying to find your style, it's less about finding your style and just thinking about what are the things that you like, which is literally the kind of the thought process that I went through. Was what do I like? I like the 80s. I like the colors of the 80s. I like working with light as well, and neon kind of lighting, and the 80s kind of lends itself well for me to do that. It's a good excuse to do that. I also like drawing kind of like mecha kind of techie things, which fits again with the 80s kind of cyberpunk vibe, because cyberpunk takes a lot of its cues from synthwave, which takes a lot of its cues from 80s stuff.
Right.
Um, and yes, I do listen to a lot of synthwave music. Um, so that was more kind of the reflection for me in that sense was, here are the things that I like. Here are the ingredients that I really like. Let's throw those on a pizza and see what happens.
Right.
And it's not necessarily this thing of, um, you know, always making the same kind of pizza, but I am trying to kind of mix my ingredients together in a way that makes sense and in a way that I enjoy kind of doing. And that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're talking about client work, is when you've decided I want to open up a pizza restaurant and you've decided what kind of pizza restaurant that's going to be, you got to stick to that, and you got to really make sure that people understand that that's what you're about.
Yeah.
So that they don't come in and order sushi from you,
Just a
but they're only
ham and
ordering a
pineapple
pizza.
pizza restaurant only. That would be
Yeah,
my
exactly.
restaurant.
Which is
Who's with me?
which is like probably um, a little bit niche, and a lot of people might think like, oh, how much business are you actually going to make? But I think if people can identify you as that, then that's comfortable for them. They know that's what's going to happen. So I think style is definitely something that grows on you. And even now, like if you look at my Instagram, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. I do a little bit of pixel art. I do a little bit of manga only stuff. So it can be a little bit kind of weird for people seeing that and thinking like, all right, well, you're not the go-to person for manga art, and you're not the go-to person for cyberpunk art, because there are
Right.
people who only do that, who would probably be better to brief on if you had a cyberpunk brief that you needed to be done. But there is definitely this thing, I think, of like, be very, very careful of finding a style, because it can be very tempting to look at somebody's work and just go like, that's awesome, I want to do that. And that's really, really dangerous, because then you fall into this kind of plagiarism copying thing.
Yeah.
And nobody's ever going to really want to work with you, not because you're copying, but because you're trying to beat somebody at their own game who's already been doing it for so long. So if I want that particular style, I'll just ask that person who
Right.
has already been doing it for more time. So yeah, I think be mindful of that when you're looking for a style. I'm not saying don't look at other people's work, because that's absolutely where it all starts. But just be mindful that when you do find a style that you really like, make it your own. And making it your own, I think, means just think about the things that you like and how do you make it your own little kind of flavor, if you will? How do you make it like it's a little bit different when I do it? And yeah, I can see why people would think it's similar, but it's still a little bit. I know that it's my jam.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable with that. And I think that's crucial.
Nice.
Yeah, hopefully that wasn't too like meaning of lifey.
No, that's a great answer. Absolutely. I love hearing you talk about that stuff, because you've been doing this for quite some time now. So you have a very, very good kind of grasp on that, and you've been through like so many different iterations of your own career. Like I remember when your website, had all sorts of different work on it, like so much different stuff.
I might just bring that up real quick.
Yeah.
How are we going for time?
So we've probably got about 20 minutes left.
Yep. Oops, that's not the thing that I wanted to write. So I've kept this page up on my website, mostly just to show in cases like this.
Right. You've still got the like Wayback Machine kind of thing, so you can see if you can remember it.
I don't know if I can remember. I might just send you a link, and we can maybe put a link in the description of the replay.
Yeah,
But
and we can also do it
um,
tomorrow. So we're going to be back here with
yeah,
Jeremy again tomorrow.
yeah,
So we can pick up kind of where we
yeah.
left
So we might
off.
have a look at that then.
So yeah,
But
we
yeah,
can.
I used to do a lot of different things. I used to do a little bit of watercolor, a little bit of vector, a little bit of
Mm,
type, a little bit of this, and it actually kind of played against me in in the sense that it would be really confusing for clients
right.
to kind of look at my website and try and decide, who is this person? What do they do? What am I likely to get if I
Mm,
order something from them? And it's a little bit like, again, like it's a restaurant that serves pizza and sushi and soups and wraps and all these different things. That's going to be really confusing for a client to look at, because we're going to just not be sure about who you are and what you're doing.
mm,
So I think it's really, really important to remember when you guys are doing this, like, be clear about who you are. Um, the other thing is, if all you want to make is, if you're feeling like making pizza and somebody walks in and orders a soup from you, if soup is on your menu, that's kind of your fault.
right.
Like, you can't be annoyed at the client
Yeah.
for ordering something that you've shown on your menu. But I think that the bigger issue with that is, um, it it becomes this thing where, look, I feel like pizza, and you do pizza, but I don't know. I have this feeling that pizza from a place that only sells pizza is going to be better, and they're probably right.
Right.
The person who specializes in the thing is potentially going to do it better than the person who does it and a whole bunch of different things. Now, that might be wrong. It might be completely inaccurate, but that at least will be the perception
Right.
of, I, I don't know, maybe the person who's only ever doing pizza and who's done it for like 15 years of their life,
Mm,
I feel like their pizza would probably be better. They would know what they're doing a little bit more. So it's too hard to compete on that many levels,
yeah.
if
Totally.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's always worrying when the restaurant specializes in everything.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I just like, I'm never too kind of keen on that kind of stuff, because it also means there's like, oh well, what do I want?
Right.
I can have
Too much
everything. So
choice.
yeah,
Yeah,
what do I want?
it's true. The answer is always burgers. Um, someone was asking what quick question I think this one is. What kind of drawing hardware are you using? I think you mentioned very early on. Are you on the Wacom at the moment?
I am on a Cintiq.
Cintiq, Wacom
Um,
Cintiq. Yeah.
yeah, so it's just a 13-inch Cintiq, which is basically your Wacom, but with a screen rather than just the actual thing on its own.
Which I
So
think Ben
that's,
was
yeah,
using
that's what I'm
yesterday as
using.
well. He was using the
Yeah,
Cintiq.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty standard thing, and I think anybody who's um, thinking of becoming an illustrator, they can be a little bit on the pricey side,
Mm,
especially if you're just starting out or if you're a student.
yeah.
But I think they are a pretty essential piece of hardware. Um, if you're going to be serious about doing illustration, trying to do it all with a mouse is, it's not going to be super fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. There was a couple of people having a chat about the line drawing and then how you're going over it with the inking. So you've got like your blue lines and then you're inking, and yeah, a couple of people were saying that they quite like the sketch, like your sketch, like your
Yeah.
original lines. So I guess the question kind of in there is, do you ever find that you want to add in? Because I know that a lot of your stuff looks, I mean, it looks vector based, although it's not. But you have a very crisp look to most of your work. But do you ever go like maybe tone it back a little bit and try to add like a little bit of that sketchiness back in? Because there was quite a few people in chat that were liking that look that you were going.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is something that kind of like tears at me a little bit, is um, how to um, how to replicate that feeling. And it's what we were talking about before, where, at the end of the day, it is still a drawing.
Mm,
So you kind of want to keep that in there and make sure that people understand that this is still a drawing.
Mm.
One of the reasons as well, we'll see this when I start doing color, I'll probably get to color tomorrow at this rate, but um, I I like to use nice big thick outlines mostly because it then allows me um, to add in my colors a little bit more seamlessly.
Right.
So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of times where I will do a sketch, and this I think holds true for a lot of artists. I'll do a sketch and then I'll look back at the final piece once I've inked it all up and kind of like, cleaned it all up
Mm.
and go, I kind of liked it better when it was a rough sketch. And that, I think it's a good thing, but it's also can be a bit of an annoying thing because then you're trying to replicate that kind of roughness in a in something that's not inherently rough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that is definitely something that sometimes I really like to sketch.
Mm.
But in terms of coloring it in, it becomes way trickier trying to get that, like, these lines aren't complete. Like, it becomes more of a painterly feel, I
Right.
guess, is what I'm getting at here, which I have absolutely nothing against. And sometimes I will get out the old, like, digital oil brush
Mm.
and paint some kind of like really more painterly thing in there. Um, but again, for consistency, it's not really what I would normally do.
Mm.
So I kind of have to get beyond that and just go like, nope, I'm not going to do that, and that's okay. But yeah, there is definitely a lot of times where I'm just like, I like my sketch baby. I want to keep my sketch baby, but I
Sketch
can't.
baby. I like it. I like it a lot. So yeah, we will be back tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting 9 o'clock Sydney time, so just half an hour. So wherever you are in the world, when we started, we're here for 2 hours again tomorrow, answering all the questions, all of your food-related references. We'll be back. Just going to quickly throw up the schedule. So we can just have another quick look. So this is what we're doing over here in Sydney in the Asia Pacific team. So we had Ben Marriott yesterday, illustration today with Jeremy, which we're going to continue tomorrow, 9 o'clock in Sydney. And we're going to do a little bit of custom typography and we're going to muck around in Illustrator as well. And then on Friday, we're here again with Ian Haig in Premiere. So we hope you can come back, ask more questions. There's probably more stuff. Been a very active chat today. I'm loving. We love being on Behance. We haven't been on Behance very long, but you guys are amazing. So thank you for having us
Yeah,
here.
thanks for all the questions. It really is awesome.
Being so engaging. It's really, really great. And I hope everyone's doing okay during this, working from home ISO time.
Yeah,
Very unique time in our lives.
so I'll just jump in here because I did something a little bit different here where I have decided to put those on their own layer, and that is so that I can draw the curve of the hair in one clean stroke, and then I can just erase inside without having to be worried about erasing these ones. So you'll notice I haven't done it to the kind of chopsticks, but I have done it here, and what that means is I can then come in and erase that nice and cleanly in here. And if I cut into the other drawing, it doesn't matter because that is already on a different layer. So it just makes my
Right.
line a little bit cleaner, and it means that I can come back in and erase it a little bit smoother. Whereas if I don't do that, which is what I've done here, if I'm not careful, I will erase in my original line work. So I will usually do that quite a bit, and put things like that on a separate layer, just so that I don't have to do this thing where, like, for instance, if I've got all these bits sticking out of the hair and I'm trying to get a nice clean curve, I don't have to do this and then it does that and then that, and that's not a great kind of looking curve behind there. So all that kind of stuff is just like a little bit more kind of practical for me. Not that it's the end of the world, as you guys can see, I can cleanly kind of, or more or less cleanly, get rid of that in there, but it just makes my life a little bit harder not having kind of planned that for the future. How are we going for time?
We have about 10 minutes left.
All right, cool. So I'll probably get all the line work done today. and then we can jump into color tomorrow, and then we'll also have a look at doing some cool 3D type in Illustrator. And we'll also have a look at using the blend tool in Illustrator to create that 3D type, which is totally not what the blend tool is for, but works a charm nonetheless. So we'll do a little bit of a 3D effect in Illustrator, and then we'll come into Photoshop and play with gradient settings and presets and put in some cool kind of like 80s chrome color feeling to it. And then we'll place that into our illustration.
Cool.
And then we can start to add some grain and some effects to it to make it look like a cool kind of 80s, a little bit kind of grungy, a little bit imperfect 80s poster print kind of vibe. So that'll be tomorrow's game.
That sounds cool. Do you always do your type in Illustrator? I mean, because I know that Photoshop's your jam.
No, not necessarily.
No, not always.
I'd like to say yes.
You don't have to say yes. It's cool.
I would be lying.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, like if you're actually working with, like actual type, like typesetting or putting type on a poster, like properly typed, not like custom type.
Yeah.
Then like 100% you need to be working in Illustrator. Photoshop has a type tool, but it's not vector based as nothing is in Photoshop. And so it's just not as user friendly. And it's generally kind of regarded as a bit of a no-no in the industry doing type in Photoshop. Not that that stops me anyways, but when we're talking about custom type, like illustrated type, you can definitely do stuff in Photoshop and see how you like it. It really just depends on how you like to work and what is the results that you're after.
Cool.
Here's another thing as well for you guys. If you're doing curves, if you're trying to get nice, clean, smooth curves and line work like this, there's this idea of push and pull. If I have to, like, I'm lifting my pen up so you can kind of see what I'm doing. If you push a curve, like if you put your pen down and then push, it's always a little bit trickier. You always have to put it down and then pull curve. You're always going to get a much smoother line than if you're trying to push that curve. So pulling is always going to be better than pushing. Obviously, if you're using digital, that's going to be the case. But if you're using an actual pen on paper, if you push, that pen's just going to kind of grind into the grain of the paper, and you're just going to punch holes through it. So you always need to pull. But your arm and your hand is a lot smoother when you're pulling than when you're pushing. Okay, turn the symmetry off, and we're going to do a few little details that I might do on a separate layer now.
This one. How are you keeping sane during this isolated time?
Am I keeping sane?
Yeah, actually, I should have started. Are you there? Are you still there, Jeremy? Are you the man I know?
I'm actually I'm starting to. Ooh, geez, that looks horrible. Sorry about that. I'm actually starting a bunch of different things that I normally don't have time for.
Right.
And so not to sound like, oh, this is great, I'm loving Corona, but
sure.
There's a lot of time on our hands, and for somebody who usually works from home anyways, that can be a real asset for me to try and do different things. So, for instance, I am trying to learn Japanese, which I've been doing for a little while, and that has given me kind of a little bit of time to do that. So I'm quite grateful for that.
Oh, wow.
I am about to launch my own YouTube video as well, which I'm sure I'll plug in
Oh, you are?
when we actually get to that. Yeah, so
Nice one.
I've got all the gear now. I've got a whole bunch of content. So I'll be starting a YouTube video hopefully pretty soon.
Cool.
So yeah, those are just some of the ways that I'm kind of staying sane. I'm playing lots and lots of video games as well.
I wish I
Yeah.
was. I wish I was, my friend. Those days seem to be in my past at the moment.
Well, you've got a child, so that immediately makes it a little bit harder for you.
Does add an extra layer, for sure.
Yeah.
That is for sure. You have a cat.
I do, but she's very self-contained. It's a little bit too self-contained,
Right.
actually, for my liking. Although it is winter, so she is enjoying staying on my legs,
Which is
as
always
much as she
nice.
possibly can.
It's always nice when,
Yeah.
when the cat gives you some attention, then you realize, oh, it's because it's winter and it's cold. I see.
Yeah, but it's still attention.
It's still attention. Yeah, I take what I can get. That's absolutely
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, and then I think just going for walks. We do, my girlfriend and I do a thing called Retro Sweat, which is this like 80s aerobics
Yes.
class that's run by a girl called Shannon Dooley, who like you get all dressed up and you just put on your 80s gear and listen to some 80s music. So that's a good like lounge exercise that we can do.
Right.
That just like, it keeps that variety, so you're not always doing the same thing. And so I don't just turn into a potato sitting at my computer all day,
Yeah.
or in front of a console playing games, which is obviously pretty important.
Yeah. That's true.
But yeah,
That's true. You can be an exercising potato.
I can. Yeah, a fit potato.
Potato. A chip.
Yeah.
What sort of stuff are you going to put on your YouTube channel?
So I'm going to be having some tutorials, like basically tips and tricks. A lot of the kind of the stuff that I am covering today, some sort of Photoshop tips, probably some Fresco, some Illustrator, and hopefully as well we'll have a few kind of more meaning of life things as well. So I might do things on sort of in terms of like how to quote and invoice, how to price things. So it's not just going to be like, here's how to do this and here's how to draw that kind of stuff, which is important and definitely something that's handy to know. But a part of being an illustrator is also obviously running a business as a freelancer and knowing how to deal with clients and all that. So my plan is to talk a little bit about those things as well, and hopefully get around to that.
That's super cool. Oh, Hitchem said they just finished Serico. I really wanted to get into that one. There's so many good games out there right now. What games are you playing? Have you played that one?
I've played Sekiro. Yeah,
Sekiro,
I think it's
that's right. Sorry, I pronounced it incorrectly.
It's obviously it's Japanese, so that's going to happen. I enjoyed it. I thought it was quite cool. A little bit on the hard side, I thought, but obviously that's the whole point of it. But I'm always a little bit torn on games like Dark Souls or those kind of things that are like, or Neo, for instance. Like Neo is really cool.
Pretty punishing
Japanese
games.
game, but it's just like, at what point does it stop being fun and just becomes more frustrating than anything else? And at the end of the day, really, a video game its first purpose is to provide fun and entertainment for you. And if all it's doing is giving you like peptic ulcers, then
start getting stressed out.
Maybe that's not the healthiest thing you could ever do. So at the moment, I'm actually playing Ni no Kuni 2. and it's quite enjoyable. It's also really weird.
Yeah, totally. We're in a bit of a 2-minute warning, I would say now, so we can start
Okay.
kind of winding down. So thanks to everyone in chat. I'm super impressed by some of you. 1:23 in the morning,
Wow.
3:22 a.m.
Yeah.
Hardcore. So impressed. We're just starting our day.
Uh,
It's 10:24 here
yeah.
in Sydney. I haven't had a coffee yet. I mean, like,
Dude, this was an early start for me. Like
yeah, I know, right?
in these quarantine days, I got up at like 20 past 7. So
Yeah.
you guys are putting me to shame.
Yeah, it's amazing. We were talking to Ben Marriott about the early start the other day, and he was sort of saying it's quite strange for animators to start so early. And I suggested maybe
Yeah,
just
I saw that, yeah.
maybe just stay up. It's what we used to do when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
Very good. Well, this has been amazing. I think we might wind down just in case we get booted. Sometimes with the time difference and everything, we want to make sure we don't have a hard sort of kind of cut off.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for everything. Thanks for the
Oh,
early start.
thanks. No, thanks for having me.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
It is. And this is amazing what you've been able to do in such a short amount of time. And also narrating and answering questions and talking to us and teaching us all these things as we go. It's been so much fun. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow, which would be super
Yeah,
cool.
same.
We're going to do some type. We're going to muck around in Illustrator a little bit, some more Photoshop stuff as well, answering your questions. And thank you to chat. It's been awesome. There's been some great questions, and please join us again tomorrow. And yeah, I think that is it.
Yeah. And keep them coming for sure. Hopefully we'll get as many questions tomorrow. It's always really fun. It's just, if it's just me drawing, might be a little bit plain.
Or you get stuck with my dumb questions. So, and I think we've done things like this so often that I kind of know the answers to a lot of the questions. So you get a lot of similar questions from me. Alrighty then. Well, thank you again, everybody. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Flynn.
Bye.
See you guys tomorrow.
Cheers.